Despite near universal commitments to end child marriage, 1 in 3 girls in developing countries will probably be married before they are 18. That's according to the United Nations Population Fund. Now, 1 out of 9 girls will be married before their 15th birthday. Most of these girls are poor, less educated, and living in rural areas. Over 67 million women 20 to 24 years old in 2010 had been married as girls. Half were in Asia, 1/5 here in Africa. But UNICEF warns that by 2050, the number of child brides in Africa could more than double, surpassing South Asia as the region where the problem is worst. So, just how widespread is the problem in Africa? And beyond policy and legislation, what else needs to be done to stem the tide? I'm Penina Karibe. Welcome to Talk Africa. Many African countries are now trying to save girls from early marriages. In Zimbabwe, a new law now seeks to make it an offense for parents to reach a customary marriage arrangement on behalf of their children who are below the age of 18 years. Farai Mwakutuya sat down with Essie Majome, one of the members of parliament pushing for this new law.
Since 2006, marrying a child below the age of 18 has been a crime. But lax enforcement has seen the illegal unions continue, particularly in rural Zimbabwe. According to UNICEF, currently 31% of Zimbabwean girls are married off before their 18th birthday. But there is now a renewed push to clamp down. In January, the Constitutional Court reaffirmed the 2006 law when it passed a judgment that criminalized child marriages, including in customary arrangements. Parliamentarians will extend the law to prosecute parents who sanction the marriage of underage children.
I think it's a good thing that we are now finally moving towards implementing the protection of children from marriages. In fact, it's not even from marriages, it's protecting children from child sexual abuse that is comes under the guise of marriage.
Because of their age, child brides are subjugated and abused with often dire circumstances, as in the case of Nikla, who was married at age 14. She says her husband denies her food. The marriage has changed her life for the worse.
I didn't have HIV when I got married, but when I gave birth to my child, I was diagnosed positive. My life is hard. I just wish I could get some contraceptive tablets so I can prevent another pregnancy, because I can't have another child as hard as things are.
Orphaned as a child, she saw marriage as an escape from the Spartan existence under the care of relatives. 3 years on, she regrets the decision.
I wish that young girls could strive to find jobs instead of getting married early. I wish I could find a job and take care of my child.
And that's why activists say more needs to be done beyond the stiff jail sentences.
We need to keep our girls in school. We need to revive our economy and remove this vulnerability of children.
Many in Zimbabwe face economic hardships, which have been blamed for fueling the unlawful marriages. Farai Mwakutuya, CCTV, Harare, Zimbabwe.
The African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child sets the age of marriage at 18 years. The Charter expects member states to take necessary steps and measures to enforce this provision and protect the rights of children. Grim Chala sought the AU's position on the problem and the challenges facing African countries.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, on behalf of CCTV. Now, how widespread is the problem of child marriage in Africa?
Well, thank you very much, Gurum. The issue of child marriage has been part of our broader agenda of women's empowerment. As you recall, we had a whole summit, that was looking at the empowerment of women towards our Africa socio-economic development, particularly the Agenda 2063. The problem of child marriage on the continent gave us a wake-up call we all never thought the problem was as serious as it was. So in fact, on our original estimate, we found out surprisingly that 34% of all marriages on the continent were under the age of 18, some of them even much, much, much younger in some countries. And then we also found out that this ranged from 25% to about 75% in some countries, surprisingly. So we took some countries by surprise, because when we told them we were doing this campaign, then they went back. Nobody thought it was a serious problem for them, but they went back and quickly checked the statistics, and it was surprising what they came up with. And this is one of the reasons for the popularity of the campaign.
What is driving the vice and making it difficult to eradicate the problem in the continent?
Well, we have found out that it is intertwined with quite a number of African issues. Culture playing a major role, the education, socio-economic development, religious practices we used to think were very, very important, but we're now beginning to see it otherwise. The issue of the fact that people in the villages were detached to most of the developments that were going on in other places. And then surprisingly, lately, we found out that even the towns as well, the problem was very, very significant. So it's a widespread problem that we have found is present in every member state of the African Union.
Commissioner, what is the African Union's common position in eradicating child marriage in the continent?
Their position, according to the African Union Committee of Experts for the Rights and Welfare of the Child, is saying a child by definition is below the age of 18 years. And when you look at the social development framework, for the agenda for social development on Africa, that we have a common position, it is found out that it is in fact a human right, that it's a human rights issue, the issue of marrying children below the age of 18. We have now in fact made it one of our human rights issues that we are looking at. So it is a very, very serious problem. Now, it's very, very important in our current agenda because it's an agenda that's driven by people.
Yeah, yes.
So what we are doing is we are undermining the most important aspect of the community because we're talking about children who will carry the agenda forward eventually. If we start abusing the children the way we are doing, then who is going to carry our agenda forward in the future? So this brought it out. It made it very, very prominent with the current AU programs for socio-economic development.
Where does the problem lie and what is the AU doing to surmount them?
On the whole, the first problem we had was knowing that the problem existed and accepting that it is a serious issue. Well, from 2014 May, we launched the campaign against child marriage. And this has taken huge proportions. Apart from the top 10, 11 countries where we've launched the program, the awareness is now in every single member state because we have virtually every member state requesting that they want to launch the program as well. Those that don't come out clearly to launch it are making inside member states programs to launch the program. They all have plans of action towards eradicating child marriage. So I would say on the advocacy part, we have really, really succeeded.
My final question, and this is going to be a tough one. Can Africa, according to you, eradicate child marriage?
Well, we hope that they would eventually, because I actually don't see any reason why anybody would want to marry anyone below the age of 18. As I say, if we put in place the correct aspects of empowering women, particularly girls, that's one way of eradicating it. As I said, you look at the broader picture, women are not empowered, particularly girls. They don't have the same rights as boys. So that is the place where we should start looking at it. Once we get that in order, the rest of it will actually become easy. But I will hazard to say it's going to take some time before that happens, because you remember we talked about education, talked about socio-cultural issues, we talked about standard of living, we talked about socio-cultural practices, and these ones you don't get over within a very short time. So it's going to take some time. But we are making a lot of progress.
We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, my expert guests will shed some light on the extent of Africa's child marriages problems and what can be done. Stay with me. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, to help us understand the roots of Africa's child marriage problem and the role of policy and legislation in tackling it, I have expert guests standing by in Nairobi, Tsitsi Singizi, Communication Specialist, UNICEF East and Southern Africa Office. I also am joined from Lagos by Elizabeth Bernard Soho, founder of the Transformation and Development Center and an advocate against child marriage. And of course, with me here in studio is Mr. Wanjala Wafula, Program Director, Coexist Initiative. Thank you all for joining us. Elizabeth, you're in Lagos. Let me begin with you. I understand your mom was a child bride. How old was she when this happened? Just give us a background of the circumstances that led to that.
She was about 11, 12 when she was married off. She was not really told she was going to be married off. Her father was enthroned as a new king in our place in Edo State in Nigeria, in Isha, Ubiaja to be precise. And there was tussle. I'm relating what she told me and even what my maternal grandmother told me. And in the process, my maternal grandfather, the king, was adopted. And of course, in that process, her mother, that's my maternal grandmother, a woman who didn't go to school. She was just a wife, a full-time housewife. She had to run for her life with her children, 4 of them, and ran to her mother's place. That's my maternal great-grandmother's village. And so there she was. My mother was very young. And in the process, what was she doing to be able to take care of her children? So people were saying, let your child stay with me. I'll take care of her. I'll do this. That was how my mother was taken and was told she was going to live with an uncle in Ibadan, in Oyo State in Nigeria. And she was about 11, thereabout. And when she got there, she met my late father. But she said the people in the compound where they live together, they will be calling her Iyawo, Iyawo, which in Yoruba dialect in Nigeria means wife or new wife. But she didn't understand what it means. And my father, of course, my late father, of course, didn't touch her, allowed her to settle down until about 2 months later. And that was just it. One night, my late father came down because she was sleeping on the floor. And she was surprised. And he said, look, I'm not your uncle, you are my wife.
So, Titi, coming to you and listening to Elizabeth talking about the story of her mom, obviously this is something that's not just unique to Nigeria. This is a problem we're experiencing here in Africa. Titi, how widespread is this problem in the continent?
Yeah, indeed. It's not a story that is peculiar to Elizabeth, sadly so. This is a story that is prevalent across Africa, Eastern, Southern, and Western, where Elizabeth is based. In Africa, I know 125 million young women are married before their time, before they're 18, that is. So it is very widespread. And we also know in UNICEF that women, young girls in rural areas are likely to be married off earlier than their peers in the urban settings. This goes beyond even that. When we look at the rural and the wealth quintiles, the poor and the rich, we know that the poor are likely to marry off their girls at a younger age than the rich people. So it is widespread. It goes across wealth quintiles. It grows across rural and urban settings. And it's a big, big number. 125 million is a huge, huge number. So it is widespread.
Wanjala, let me just paint the picture here for you, picking up, of course, from what Tsitsi is talking about. In 2012, 70 million women aged 20 to 24 around the world had been married before the age of 18. And statistics say that if this trend continues, 150 million girls will be married before their 18th birthday over the next decade. So that's an average of 15 million girls every year. So what is driving this vice, and why is it so difficult to eradicate it?
I mean, it's a great pleasure being here. Child marriage actually finds a lot of, and I think even the statistics are an understatement. I mean, I've been to communities where we have 100% of all the girls getting married early. I was in Somalia, I've been to Southern Sudan, I've been to communities at the coast where 100% of the girls or women got married when they were below the age of 15. Child marriage for me is as a result of the socialization processes across Africa. Men are socialized to find relevance in praying over women. Men are socialized to think that they're entitled to using the women's bodies and entitlements, while women are socialized to accept the second position of subservience. And so until we get the conversation going, until we get men involved in the discussions, until we get the socialization processes that accept women as human beings that should be respected and listened to, we're still going to have this problem going on. It doesn't matter how much legislation we pass. As long as boys know that they're going to wait. And you know, the conversation here around girls getting married to old men is not even the issue. I mean, I've been to communities where I went to a football field and watched boys playing soccer and girls playing netball. I saw young girls who are at the age of 14 having babies, and boys who are age of 15 playing football, having been fathers. You go to Malawi, and Titi comes from Zimbabwe. I've been to Zimbabwe, where you have boys as young as 14 being forced to marry girls as young as 12. Because the culture and traditions dictate that men must find relevance in subduing women, in having women as a justification of their very own existence. So that means we cannot depend on legislation alone. We must go into engaging communities, engaging the drivers, which is cultural practitioners, religious leaders. In Somalia, they even think, and parts of the Islamic world, they think marrying a girl below age of 15 is religious. And so how are we going to change it until we bring up the conversations to engage the drivers of the culture and the tradition?
Right. Elizabeth, let me come to you, and I want to pick up from the point that Wanjala has talked about, legislation, because increasingly in the continent, countries are enacting laws to deal with this vice. But then we're discussing amongst ourselves and seeing the main causes of child marriage in the continent. It's poverty, it's lack of education, it's gender inequalities, it's culture and tradition. So are these laws adequate to deal with these root causes that we're talking about?
I want to say that I totally agreed with him that no matter the legislation that we are going to put in place, that until we begin to involve even the men in the discussions to let them know the evil effect of this culture, I don't know whether I should call it culture, that we may not be able to go too far. Because we need to bring the men into a round table where these discussions are going on. And we need to make them know what negative impact it's having on women. Women should not be seen as, I don't know what to call it, as something that, you know, anybody can just, a man can just use as a sex slave or whatever you may call it. We are all equal before God. So a woman should be given a voice. A woman should be given the opportunity to make up her mind whom she wants to marry, when she wants to marry. A woman should be given the opportunity to mature. Because if you come to Nigeria here, especially in the northern part, we have most of our young girls that are victims of early child marriage. They are there dumped by their husband because by the time they want to put to bed, and then they have this VIF, you know, so, and then they begin to run water. They can no longer control their system. The man leaves them and go and marry somebody else. We need to let them know. We need to bring them together. It's high time we stop locking the men out and the women gather and we talk and talk and talk. it's not going to take us anywhere.
And of course, there's a common point, Wangela, that keeps emerging as we have this conversation, and that's men need to get involved, which is where your organization comes in. Because I know Coexist Initiative, that's your organization, work with boys and men here in Kenya to change attitudes towards such harmful practices such as child marriage. How have you approached this issue?
One thing that makes me sad is just the complete lack of innovation in programming around child marriage. That you have people who are still, and I like what Titi is saying about the use of the importance of education. Children who are retained in schools, education for me is one of the solutions to stopping child marriages. As long as families and communities can accept that girls can be retained in school, then we'll stop them from early marriages. We're not using innovation. We are still thinking about legislation, and we are still thinking, we can never stop a harmful traditional practice until you think outside the box. And unfortunately, it's not in programming on issues around child marriage. Until we thought out of box with HIV/AIDS. You remember the days of abstain, be faithful, use condoms? And for many years, that never worked until we changed it and repackaged it. You know, there was used to be a practice in parts of Kenya called widow inheritance. And we demonized it to an extent where now it is only 2% prevalent. So we must, in terms of programming, we lack innovation. We lack popularization. You go out and ask, do you know how many people, you go to communities and ask the Sexual Offences Act, for example, in Kenya, or the Children's Act, and you ask how many people in the communities know about it, nobody knows about it. So we are busy in the capital cities making legislation. But we are not popularizing the legislation. We are not getting community buy-in. We are not we have politicians. I met a politician in Malawi who is the leading activist against child marriages. Then we followed him to his village in Karonga, and we sat behind a traditional meeting. And he was saying the opposite of what he says in Ilongwe. In Ilongwe, he says, we must stop child marriage. And then when he goes to Karonga, which is his village, he turns around and says, which trees are ready for harvesting in this village?
So there should be accountability.
So there has to be accountability.
Right. So let me come to you, because earlier on you did talk about governments and civil societies, that there's a need for them to play their roles. And increasingly we are seeing programs in the continent aimed at ending this problem of child marriage. So how do we get the multiple actors to coordinate their programs so we can see results?
I think coordination is not a new era. We have worked together as governments, as the UN, as civil society and communities around the rush of programs. It is just acknowledging the salient issues to child marriages. Like Wafula and Elizabeth keep emphasizing, child marriage is a process of socialization, and we have to be alive to the cultural, the social and the economical factors that drive it. Coordination will not be a challenge, but being alive, being innovative, and knowing that there are no quick solutions. We can't find quick solutions to child marriage. This has been embedded in us for years. This is backed by social arrangements spanning centuries. Ugutwala is still happening in South Africa. Talefa is still happening in Ethiopia, and these are acceptable social practices. So it's beyond just a coordination function. It's about uprooting and changing mindsets. And for me, this is where the emphasis should be placed. It should be placed in addressing those embedded social practices, those embedded social alliances that have been driving the culture, the practice. And this is only done when we recognize the central role of the community in changing this practice. This is where civil society, the Wafulas come in, they mobilize communities, then they teach communities, they build awareness, and when the awareness is there, then legislation can be supported. So it's not something that is hard, but it's just targeting the right audience with the right messages in terms of child marriages for us.
And very briefly, Wangela, to wrap up, very briefly, as Siti was saying, we need to get the communities involved. How do we get everybody in the community on board, despite all of those various beliefs that everybody subscribes to?
I will quickly just tell you what I think could work in terms of child marriage. I think I'll give you 5 points, quick 5 points of 5 solutions of best practices that can help us eliminate child marriage. One is we have to be able to prioritize budgets around child marriage. you ask any African country, for example, how much they are planning to spend in their national budgets on resources directly going towards child marriage, and you'll be told it could be hardly zero. So first of all, we don't have enough local resources to be able to get it done. Two, I think what needs to happen is popularizing existing legislation. We don't have to form any more laws or task forces or commissions. Let's just popularize existing legislation by getting community buy-in. Three, let's not make the law punitive. Because you see in many parts of Africa where the law on child marriage is, communities have revolted. In fact, you will be told of a case in Kenya where women went to the streets to demonstrate against a law that was criminalizing female genital mutilation. So we need to make laws to be people to understand the existing legislation, to have resources around it, to set up networks and systems. Because today, issues around child marriage are either being handled as a human rights issue or as a criminal issue. But we are not handling it as a religious issue, as an economic issue. Four is, for example, for God's sake, let's improve the value of a girl. I've seen it. I've gone to communities where when I demonstrate the value of a girl, communities buy in. Because communities know are governed by this old thinking that women are the second group and women are useless. But when we go there and demonstrate, especially with the positive role modeling from women, and we should have these models go out and say, I'm a girl, I went to school, and this is what I've done for communities. You know, that will help. And then finally, I think we should stop the infighting between government and civil society. There's a lot of infighting between the civil society and government. Government passes legislation that they are not implementing, they are not popularizing. Civil society goes in with a fragmented, foreign-based thinking, and somebody says, oh, we stopped child marriage in Yemen, and therefore we can stop child marriage in Zimbabwe. It doesn't work. So, and then perhaps the last one is let's be innovative. Because child marriage deals with how people are programmed and socialized, and we must reverse that.
All right.
Thank you so much.
All right, so that's all we have time for this week. But thanks to all of my guests for their insights. In Nairobi, Tsitsi Tsingizi, Communication Specialist, UNICEF East and Southern Africa Office. We also did have in Lagos, Elizabeth Bernardo-Wool. She's the founder, Transformation and Development Center. And also here in studio, we did have Wanjala Wafula, Program Director, Coexist Initiative. Thank you very much for being with us. We shall see you again next week. And of course, remember to join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. I'm Penina Karibe. Bye-bye.